So until others join, let's review a couple of questions from the slides. Let me move this from here to here, somewhere here, here. So I'll also move it here. So what is the answer for this question? We have a main flow calling a private flow, and an error happens in the private flow. And the error in the private flow is validate payload is an integer. As you can see here, this is the error message in the private flow, which is in here. And in the private flow, we have on error propagate with this payload. And in the main flow, we have on error continue with this payload. So which of these choices is the correct answer? Can you share your anyone who wants to answer this question?
Error main flow? No, success main flow.
Success main flow.
Yeah, success main flow.
Which is this one?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, let's do it together. So if I take this pencil, so it continues from here and it comes to here, and the error happens in here. So from that, every time there is an error object, it gets thrown to the error handler. In this case, the error handler is on error propagate. We are setting a payload there, and on error propagate rethrows the error. So this on error propagate is read in, read out, which means it will come with an error object to this flow reference. And still, since there is that error object, it will get rethrown to the error handler in the main flow. So it will come still read. Now this is on error continue, and on error continue is read in green out, or it resolves it. So from here, it will go to here as success. However, once it comes from the flow reference to this error handler, it doesn't continue to this one, to this processor. Does it continue to this one?
Yes, I think it continues.
This one is on error propagate. If this is on error continue, yes. If this is on error continue on the private flow, if we have on error continue, since it gets resolved and it goes as success to the flow reference, then it continues to up to the subsequent processors. However, if this is on the private flow, if we have on error propagate, it comes with an error object, and that in the main flow, once it gets thrown to the error handler, it doesn't go to the subsequent flow. So it should be error main flow. The answer should be this payload that we are setting here. We can quickly review the slides we saw last time. Let me put this as keep. And so what we say is with private flow, it was I think, yeah, something like this. So which one is this? Okay. Yeah, this slide, I think it is this slide that we see here. This slide, this one is on error propagate to on error propagate. This one is on error propagate to on error continue. Let's see this one, yeah. This one is the scenario for our question. So in this case, we have the error happening in here. So error will be thrown to the error handler, which is on error propagate. And again, this one will return an error to this flow reference. And the flow reference will throw the error to this scope, which is the error handler in the main flow, which is on error continue. So the error continue resolves the error. However, it doesn't continue to subsequent processors, right? Subsequent processors not executed. So it throws, it returns as success and the last payload. So you see here, it is success response. In here, after the on error continue gets executed, it is success response. However, it doesn't continue to subsequent processors, as you can see here. So the answer in our case for this one, it should be our last payload in this case is error main flow. It doesn't continue to the subsequent processors after the flow reference. Is that clear, or does anybody have any question? Yeah, I think review the diagrams with the charts with different scenarios. They will help you to remember it. Okay. Now let's continue to the next one. In this one, so here we have a validator. It checks if it is a blank string. However, our payload is not blank. So we have the string, my payload, some string. So this is blank string. It will return some error. There is a logger and there is another set payload with my payload 2. What will be the error message response you get in Postman if you send a request in Postman? I have this project, this flow here. Let me show you. So, and we can check it together. So this is the path is a check. So I can just do check here, send request, and we can see it here. So in here, let me show you. In this is blank string. I have, it is checking the payload, the value is the payload, and there is an optional where a message where you can put optional message, or you can leave it blank. So in this case, I have put I am failing string, and in the slides also you can see it. The reason that they put a screenshot of the XML code, some part of the XML code, is because there is some information that you can get from there. So in this case, the message you see is here. If this message doesn't exist, then the default error will be the payload, the string is not empty, will be the error. The string is not blank. The string is not blank. So it will be this answer. This one will be the default answer in that case, if we don't have a message. But in cases where we have a message, pay attention. If there is a message, then the error should be the message. So the error that it should return should be this one, I am failing, because we have added that message. So if we come here, and you can see it here in the description, there is I am failing here. However, if I remove this, let's just finish this and go to Postman. I am failing is here, as you can see. However, if I just leave this blank, the message, then the error we get will be different. It will be the string is not blank. So save. Okay, initializing up. Now we can send again. Send. Now if I come here, oh, okay, successfully connected. If I send now the description, let me meet you maybe. Okay, it's fine. So you see the error description is string is not blank. So this is the default. So you have to pay attention what is there in the XML and its optional settings. The answer you get will depend on the configuration is what I am showing here. A third example before we start today's session, a third quiz, a third question is, let me move this here and make this. So the answer in here is I am failing, we said, because we have this message. If we don't have a message, if this is not there, the answer will be this one. But if there is a message, then that will be the answer. For other types of connectors and processors also, if there is such kind of things, you have to pay attention how it is configured. Okay, another one, third one, is this one. This one should be easy, I think. We just have main flow, and there is one payload here, success begin, and there is an HTTP request. So the error happens in the HTTP request. Yeah, as you can see, the error throws an error in the HTTP request. As you can see here, that's what it is saying. So what will be the what will it return if we send from Postman or from another web client? What will be the answer? And see, for the HTTP listener, the default configuration is shown here. It is not, we have not customized it. The response is payload, the status code, we have not put any value. For the error response, we have the error description, and the status code is also by default 500. We know when it is error. So who can share in the chat their answers? Is it number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4 for this one? What will be? So the error happens in here, right? The error happens in there. So let's say it goes like this, it goes like this, the mid event is going like this, and error happens here. From here, it comes to here. Red in, green out. Always remember that. Error gets resolved. It is success here. So your answer should be number 1 or number 2. Yep, yeah. Yeah, so if it is success, it returns, if it is success, you go to what is there under response here, right? You don't go to error response, it is this part. Since it is success, it is not error. And here we have, what we have is a payload. And if you see the payload, initially in here, when in the beginning, we have success begin, then an error gets generated here. Now our payload have been rewritten, so our payload is error. So the answer should be number 1. Those of you say number 1, yeah, right. The status code is 200 because it is success for on error continue, and the last payload is error. Okay, perfect. So these are the questions related to what we have already covered. We have other questions. We will see them later. Let us see what topics we are going to cover today. So we'll start from here. And I have a project. I will push it to GitHub once we complete this class. Okay, so last time we saw how to handle errors at the processor level and also at the flow level. And we saw 2 error handling scopes, on error continue and on error propagate. And what we said is, if when a mule event is being processed, if an error occurs, then an error object gets generated. That is what we see here. When there is no error, the mule event doesn't have this part. It doesn't have an error. But if a processor or a connector generates an error, then we have an error object. And what happens when an error occurs? An error object gets created, and how the error object gets resolved depends on the error handling scope we have. If it is on error continue, it resolves it. Whereas if it is on error propagate, it resolves it, we said. And today we are going to see these topics, handling specific types of errors. Like, for example, we may want to continue even if some types of errors happen, and we may want to stop our flow if some other types of errors happen. So we want to handle specific types of errors. Depending on the type of the error, we may want to handle them differently. The other thing we are going to see is application level or global error handler. What this means is, rather than defining error handlers flow by flow or at processor level, we can have global or application level error handlers. How do we set up and how does it behave when we have combinations of application level error handler, flow level error handler, and processor level error handler, all of them together? What is the sequence of execution we are going to see? The other one is mapping errors to custom error types. Like, for example, if you are connecting to 3-4 databases and the error is just connectivity issue, it will just tell you the error is DB connectivity. It will not tell you which connection failed. So you can map the errors to custom error types. If we are connecting to Postgres, for example, you may add custom message that says that Postgres failed, and if MySQL is failing, also the same thing. You can put custom error description and error message. So the other also these ones are very minor things. We are going to see also how to raise an error in a choice router. So we have been looking choice router for different applications, and we say it processes from top down until it gets an expression that returns true. If there is no true, then the default block is executed. But in the default block, we may raise an error rather than it returns success. We may add an error handler there so that it raises an error. That one also we are going to see. And this one I have added a link already. You can read this one. I think if we don't get time, that's fine. You can also reference a global error handler from a flow. In the XML of the flow, you can add the name of the global error handler. This one you can check it yourself. Okay, so let's start with this one, handling specific types of errors. So in here, what am I showing? On the left, you can see in an error handler, we can have multiple error handling scopes. You see on the left, I have the first one on the top on error continue, and it handles only DB connectivity errors. And below it, I have on error propagate, as you can see here, and it handles validation invalid number errors. And on the bottom, which is usually what we should do, we have on error continue with type any. So by default, it is any. It should handle any type of error if we don't specify the different types of errors. But if we want to handle them differently, we can have multiple error handling scopes, multiple on error continues, multiple on error propagators, and set it up this way. And as you can see, on the top, it is on error continue, whereas the second one is on error propagate. So when it encounters this type of error versus this type of error, it is going to behave differently. The first one, it will get resolved in this error handling scope, whereas the second one, it will get rethrown. And the order of execution, it starts from the top and goes down. So starts here, it goes down. Once it gets an expression that evaluates to true, then the error is handled by that error handling scope, and it doesn't continue to the rest parts of the error handling scopes. Like for example, the error you have, if it is this one, if it is DB connectivity, if it is this one, then since this returns true, it will be handled by this on error continue scope. So it is not going to check this one and this one. It will not go down here. So the error is handled by the first error handling scope whose condition evaluates to true, what this one is saying. So let's see how we can do this. And in here, there are two ways we can handle specific types of errors. One way is we can just select from the drop down. There is any by default, and the different types of errors. It shows you different types of errors based on the different connectors you have in your flow. The other one is by using this when here. So let's see both of them in the project I have. So this, if you come here, so yeah, this one is the question we had, string is not blank. I will stop this and open another project. So stop and close project. I have error handling with global error handler. So the global error handler will add it together. So I will remove it. Let me remove this one. Okay. So remove it from here. We will see, we define it in the, let me see if I have, what is it? Okay. Okay, perfect. I should be fine here. So I have this flow, for example. Let me run it in debug mode and show you what I am doing. And by making changes, we will see how it behaves. So, okay. So in here, let me run it in debug mode while I am explaining what I am doing. This one is, I combined two projects we did before. So what it does is it combines some data. You give it a custom, an employee ID. You see where I have a URI parameter here at the bottom for the listener. Come on, okay. Yeah, I have a URI parameter here within curly braces. Combined data is a path. And this employee ID, I am creating a variable from it, as ID. Here I am checking if the ID is an integer, because in the database ID we have is an integer. So I want to make sure correct data type is sent. If it is string, for example, it should give an error message. So let me show you this table. Then using this ID, you should get data from the employee table and from the employee territory, combine them together here. So give me about a given employee. It should give me information, including their address, when they were, their birth date and other information, and also the employee territory. And once I get this from the employee ID, I'm getting the name, the first name of that person. And I'm just, for fun, I'm just checking, I'm getting the nationality and gender prediction using this genderized and nationalized APIs that we saw before. So the reason I added these different processors is because I want to show you the different types of errors it shows. So one thing, the other thing I want to add here is if you don't have the processors, it doesn't show you. I have this one in this test2 flow. I just have set payload. And if I click here and go to type, if you click this one, the only errors you see are expression and stream maximum size exceeded. These are by default. For any error handler, you see these two. The expression is when there is an error with expression, with the data with expression, and the stream maximum size exceeded is when it exceeds the maximum allowable size. However, when you have a flow that has other connectors and processors, MuleSoft brings a suggestion of, it knows the different types of errors that can happen. It can infer. So if I click here and go to type, if I click this find here, see there are different types of errors. Once I add these processors, then the possible types of errors, the namespace and the identifier, it shows me here. So by default on the top, there is any, but in the first one, let me remove these ones and we can add them. So delete. And first thing, let's add a logger maybe here and another one here. Let's make sure it is working. Clearing the console. So the path is combine data with employee ID as a URI parameter. So bring it here. So that means this one I have to replace it by a number, like 1, for example. If I send the request and come here, you see there is, so it has reached here. That means it has executed all these processors. It connected to Postgres, it connected to MySQL. And in this transform message, when I am combining them, I am creating a variable, not a payload, as you can see. Transform message, we said you can create one payload and multiple variables within one transform message by clicking this add. So I'm creating a variable and the name of the variable is payload. And I'm just concatenating. We said in scatter gather, what it returns at the end is a mule event that contains the mule events from the different routers. So in this case, from MySQL and Postgres. So here I'm just concatenating them by using this double plus. We say double plus is used for concatenation. So I'm creating this variable. As you can see, here we have the variable for employee ID 1, which is employee ID sent. the first name is Sarah, and this part, the first JSON object comes from the employee table, whereas this territory, they come from the employee territory table, and this employee is associated with two territory IDs. Anyway, I want their first name to check their gender and nationality, just for the fun of it. So click next. Now I have a flow reference. It is going to go to this private flow, comes here. Then I'm getting the nationality, then I'm getting the gender. Now here at the end in this transform message, I'm combining the gender, nationality, and what we got from the databases, accessing it using vars.payload. So the result from the private flow, it comes as a payload to this flow reference. And our original payload, we have saved it as variable, and the variable name is payload. So vars.payload here will give us the result from the first scatter gather. And payload's actual payload is what gets returned from this one. So now if I just click continue and come here, it gives me this data. Now we can make different, we can introduce different types of errors and see how it behaves. So the first thing is handling different types of errors. So right now we don't have any error handling scope. So the default error handler will handle the errors. But if we want to add custom error handling capabilities, we go to core, and there are under the error handling, we have on error continue, on error propagate. We'll see also error handler here and raise error. But for now, in the error handling in a flow, we will use either both on continue and on propagate. Let's first bring on continue. And with error continue, let's say we want to handle this type of error. The first, if it is an integer. And in here, when I click the on error continue scope, I can come here and search for different types of errors, all the types of error, possible types of errors it is showing me here. The first one, let's say we want to just to move forward, even if there is a database connectivity issue. So db.connect I have selected, and it is on error continue, and I just want to add some payload here. You see some payload here. So this one, db failed. And we can add on error propagate below it, just drag and drop below it. And now let's say we want to handle validation. The first one, we want to handle the second, is the ID an integer. So we want to make sure, we want to check if it just starts, if it passes this DB connectivity, and if it gets handled by this on error propagate. So in this error propagate, by default it is any, but I want to change it to validation. So under validation invalid, we have this invalid number, validation invalid number. So, and add some payload, and the message, please provide an integer ID, for example. So this, let's add a third one. So we have on error continue, on error propagate. Let's add another on error propagate below it. Okay, drag and drop on error propagate. Okay. Okay, so on error propagate I have added here, and let's say this one we want it to handle all the rest of the the rest types of the errors, and by default we make it any. So if it is DB connectivity and validation invalid number, they will be handled by the first two. The rest of the error types, they will be handled by the last one. And add some payload here also, and check something. just add some message here. So now let's send an ID which is not an integer and see run this in debug mode and see how the error propagates or how the error gets handled. So clear this and it's running. So I can add a, for example, for the ID rather than an integer. Send, come here. So this one, it has failed, as you can see. A is not a valid integer, is a valid integer value is a message, the error description we see. So next, when I click next, this error, when an error happens, an error object gets created, we said that is what we see in the Mule event here. It has been created. Now, since there is an error, it should be thrown to the handler, and the error handler in this case is, we have multiple scopes here, but since it is, as you can see here, the error type, see the error type, pay attention, this error type, it is validation invalid number. So it should be handled by the second one. Now, when I click next, it has to go to this on error propagate scope. So click next. You see, it has come here. Now, since it will be handled by this one, this is on error propagate, which is read in, read out. So this error will be what we get there as a response in Postman. And by default, for an HTTP listener here, for an HTTP listener, what it should return in the response, under the response, error responses. Okay, I have modified it. So this is a payload. So rather than the error description, it is going to return the payload. And the payload I have is this one, please provide an integer ID. So this should be what it should return, the last payload value and a status code of 500, since we haven't modified the status code. So click next. If I come here, see the status code is 500 server error, and the body is please provide an integer. But by default, if it is error description, then it is going to return the error description. The reason that it is returning this payload here, please provide an integer ID, is because in the listener, as we reviewed last time, in the listener, we have under responses, if it is success, it will return this one as a body and a status code of whatever you put here, or if you don't put 200. And if an error happens, which is error in error propagate case, since it throws the error object, there is still an error, it will return in the body whatever is specified here. By default, it is the error description, but you can make it the error type or the payload, and the status code will be 500. So this is how we handle specific types of errors when it comes to handling specific types of errors using the first, we saw using this approach. The second one is we can just specify in here. I can specify, let's say this one, rather than using type here, searching from type, I can put an expression under when, and we have to make it a data with expression using high sign, square bracket, right? Using this, then we can say error type dot namespace when it is a validation. So as you can see, it is validation here. So when it is validation, if I do like this and save this, so if the namespace, we say an error has, when an error gets created, it has different properties. The main ones we commonly use are the error description and the error type. The error description is a string, the error type is an object, and the error type, it contains namespace and the identifier, and they are separated by colon, like for example, DB, colon, connectivity. DB is namespace and connectivity is the identifier. Now I'm checking when the namespace is validation. So error type namespace if double equal sign validation. This will return true or false. So when this is true, that means when the error is validation related, then this on error propagate scope will handle the error. What this is saying. Let us check this. I will stop it and run it in debug mode again. We will see if it gets handled by this scope, by the second scope, which is on error propagate. So, okay. And yeah, okay. I will still send an ID which is not an integer to raise and to get to so that this component raises an error. Send. We have A as a employee ID here. Well, it should be an integer, so that will raise an error. You see here. Now let's see if it goes to the second one, the second error handling scope. Click next. You can see here, by the way, in the error type, we have the namespace. If I expand this, see the namespace validation. That's what we did. Error on the top, you see the error is here. The hierarchy, you can see the error, the hierarchy. To access anything under this, you just start from the top and you do dot error type dot namespace is validation. So this one, the second one, in this case will be true because it is validation. Or you can even do, you can also do error type dot identifier equals to, double equal sign invalid number. Check for if this returns an invalid number, and if that's the case, then this will evaluate to true, so it will be handled by this error handling scope. There are other things also under the error object. It creates other properties also that you can check. We have mule message. The other ones we rarely use them. The most commonly used ones are error description and error type mainly. But you can see the other properties of the error object. You can explore them. So now when I click next, it should come to the second processor is what we are saying. Click next. As you can see, it has come here because that evaluated to true. So that is on error propagate. Actually, if this had this been on error continue, it would return a status code of 200, and the payload in here is still the same payload in both on error propagate and on error continue. In this case, the body we get will be the payload. The difference will be the status code. When it is on error continue, since it gets resolved, the status code will be 200, whereas on error propagate, it is still 500. So when I click next, the same thing we get here. Server error is the status code, and the body is please provide an ID. Okay, so please practice with that. Let me see, what time is it? Okay, we have only 20 minutes. Okay, let's see how to create a global error handler or application level error handler. So you can read the slides, but we will just add error handler here together and see the order of execution. Let me close this. And anybody have any questions? Okay, perfect. So our project is here. So I can simply go here and go to new and create a new configuration file. So if I do this and call it global.xml, so it creates this file for me. As you can see, it is empty. So to create a global error handler, the first thing is you go to core, and under error handling, you drag and drop error handler. To this, under this error handler, you can drag and drop multiple combinations of on error continue and on error propagate, where each one of them handles custom types of errors, or you can have one error handling scope for every type of error. So let's just have one error handling scope right now. So I added this on error continue, and in here, so if you try to search different types of errors that you have in this application, it doesn't show you the error types. It shows you only the default ones, which is expression and stream maximum size exceeded. If you want to handle, and by default it will be any in this case, if you want to handle different types of errors differently, you go here and copy the errors from here. You can copy them from here. Let's say, for example, let me drag and drop one in here. And like, for example, let's say if I want to handle HTTP security and HTTP service unavailable, so it puts them like this. Then from here I can copy it. Just copy this from here and go to global, click here and paste it here this way. But by default, the first one, let's make it just handle any type of error. And on error continue, which is red and green out. So add a payload and for the value, let's say global error handler. That's when it comes to this. The other thing is we want to understand the order of execution when we have flow level error handler, global level error handler, and also processor level error handler. So once we have this file with the global error handler, we have to tell it in the configuration, we have to tell it that this is a global error handler. And what we do is we go to global elements, like what we have been doing when creating global configuration to connect to databases, HTTP requests, and listener, and so on. So we click create, then go to global configurations. This configuration property, we use it with a YAML file that has different credentials, for example, to connect databases, and to specify the global error handler, we click this configuration. Under global properties, you click configuration, and it brings this one, default error handler. The default error handler is what I have defined here, global error handler. So just select this one. Now that one is the default error handler. And if the application level error handler we have defined. And let's remove all of this and we will see, what I can do is let me introduce an error in here in the in this request operation. So let me change the URL, like for example, make it a wrong URL by adding 2 here, API 2 something, and we will see we don't have this private flow. It doesn't have an error handler. As you can see, this block is empty. So if it is empty, it has to be handled by the global error handler. So we will see the sequence by running this one. So stop this and run it in debug mode. While it gets deployed, let's see what we have here. Let's see the sequence of operation here. The sequence of operation. So in here, what do we see? We have a flow and an error happens here in E, and there is no flow level error handler. However, we have an application level error handler. And in the application level error handler, if it is any, then it will handle it. However, if we are handling custom error types in the application level error handler, that means there will not be matching scope. That means all of them will evaluate to false. So in that case, if the application level error handler, none of the error handling scopes evaluate to true, then error handling will be done by Mule's default error handler. So that is what we see here. As you can see here, the default, Mule's default error handler handles the error. Why? Because in here we don't have any error handler in this block, as you can see. In the application level also, even if we have application level error handler, it doesn't match. Since it doesn't match, then the Mule's default error handler handles it. I think this one should be clear. The second one, see this one. In here, in the flow level error handler, we don't have any error handling scopes. However, we have application level default error handler. So, by the way, the word default, I'm using it with the application level because the application level is also default. Or it can mean also Mulus default error handler when you don't have any matching error handler. So in this particular case, the application level error handler, it matches, it evaluates to true with on error propagate. So if it evaluates to true with on error propagate, then the error will be thrown from the global error handler because it's on error propagate. That's what we see here. So in here, an error happens in E, as you can see. Let's see. So the flow goes like this. And let's say the application level error handler is here. Then error happens in E. It will get thrown to the application level error handling scope because it matches. That means it is evaluated to true in an error propagate scope. And so from here, it comes to here. It is an error propagate scope, and an error propagate scope is read in, read out. So this will also throw an error with the error. It will return the mid event with the error object to the calling flow. That's what we get here. Well, that is what we see here on the right. An error gets thrown, application default handler scope gets executed, and since it is on error propagate, it throws the error again, and that's what we get as a response. The last one, this one is very important, guys. Please pay attention here. So what do we see here? We have in here, let me use this blue color. In here, we have two error handling scopes at the flow level, but both of them, they don't match the type of error that is happening in E. But we have, let's say you have on error continue here and on error propagate here, but none of them matches to the type of error that's happening here. If we have defined something is a flow level error handler, then the application level error handler is not executed at all, whether it matches or not. So what it does is the error from here, let me show. So mid event comes like this, and error happens in E. So from here, it is going to check if the flow level error handler matches. If it doesn't match, rather than going to the application level default error handler you defined, it will be handled by Mulus default error handler. So in this case, Mulus default error handler will handle it. And Mulus default error handler is the same as it is on error propagate. So from here, it comes to here on error propagate, and that is read in, read out, and an error gets returned here. That's what it is saying. So always remember, if an error handler is defined in the flow level or in the processor level also with a try scope, if you have defined error handling scopes there, whether they match or not with the type of error we have, the application level error handler never gets executed, is what we see here. Yep, that's it. Now we can, let's go here and test it. So we are introducing an error in this request component. It is HTTP request, and we don't have any default error handler here. As you can see, this block is empty. And so when an error gets created here, it should go to the global error handler. So let's send another request, which is, we should see it moving from this file, from the handling errors with global error handler file. It should move to this one, come to this component. So what we are saying is, from this component, we should see it going to this component coming to here. Okay, let's check. Okay, from this message to this message. Okay, so send a request So now, I mean, I want the rest of the processors to execute successfully. So I have to make sure it doesn't fail in up to here, up to this flow reference. So I will send an integer so that all of these processors until the flow reference get executed successfully. And it will send the flow reference, it will send a first name variable. And we said when we saw scopes of private flow, subflow in the main flow, we say the whole mule event is accessible by the private flow. The whole mule event from the main flow is accessible from the private flow. So in this case, the first name variable, I will get it from here, come to here. And in here, as you can see, I'm accessing it using vars.firstName because I have access to the whole mule event. But I am making the URL incorrect URL by just adding some string. So it should fail here in this genderize. So this A, I'll change it to 1, click request, send request, come here. So as you can see, everything until this logger has executed successfully. Click next. It comes to flow reference. Click next. It comes to the private flow. Click next. It goes to nationalize. It should work fine. Click next. Now it will fail here. And see, an error will be generated. It says couldn't resolve this address because I added this 2. So from here, the question is from here, where does it go? It should go to the global error handler because we have not defined any error handling scope in this error handling block. So click next. From here, you will see it going to the message under global file. Click next. Click next. As you can see, it has come here to the global error handler. And the global error handler is on error continue. By default, it handles everything. I haven't specified custom error types. So it will resolve it. The same thing, the behavior is the same with the error handling scopes on error continue and on error propagate, whether they are in a flow level, application level, or processor level scopes. So it will be resolved. It means here, it will be resolved. So click next. The error object, this one, it will be gone. From here, when I click next, it will get back to the handling errors with global handler file. So we are here, click next. As you can see, it has come back here, and the flow reference got a response from this private flow. We can see what it got. It got this file, this response, global error handler. And this global error handler is what came from here. In the payload here, we have put global error handler as a payload. So the payload from the private flow, since an error happened here, the payload it got is from the global error handler, from the application level error handler. We can wrap this in a try scope if we want. Even if one of them fails, we want to get the output from the other one, then we can wrap each one of them in a try scope with their own on error continue error handling capability. Okay, so this is one. Now let's add in here, in this private flow, we say the difference between subflow and private flow is a subflow doesn't have its own error handling. The error is handled by the main flow, whereas private flow has its own error handling capability. That's what we see here. And we can add error handling here. So let me exit this. And in here, let's add on error continue, for example. And I'll just make it to handle any type of error. I'm specifying error types here. And the payload, set payload here, just we make it private flow error. So before it was global error handler, the message at the end was global error handler. But now, since we have defined in this private flow, since we have defined an error handler, it will not go to the application level error handler. It will be handled here. And whether it matches the error type or not, if we have defined an error handling scope here, it will not go to the application level error handler is what we said or what we saw in the slides. So now let me stop this and run it again in debug mode. So until this gets deployed, let's review again what we just saw. These 3 slides. So what we said is, if you have not defined any error handling scope in here, it is going to check. If you have application level error handler, it is going to check that. But if the application level error handler also doesn't match the type of error we have, then it will be handled by the Mulus default error handler. That's what we said. The other one, if it matches, then it will be handled by the application level error handler. The application level error handler will be evaluated only and only if you have not defined any flow level error handler in this case, or if the error happens in a processor also, if you have not defined any processor level error handlers there. So what this one is saying is, you have application level default error handler, and it is with a matching scope. It matches the type of error, and the scope you have is on error propagate. On error propagate, as we know, restores the error. And if this one on error continue from the application level error handler, then it resolves it. The behavior with on error continue and on error propagate scope is the same, whether they are at application level, flow level, or processor level. And the last one, the last 2 we saw, if you have any kind of error handling scopes defined here, whether they match or not to the type of error we have, the application level error handler will not be evaluated, rather it will directly go. If they don't match, it will go to the Mulus default error handler. That's what we see here. So this one is deployed. As we see, it is deployed. The change we made is, we added in this private flow, we added error handler. It is on error continue. So the payload here is private flow error. Before, the error we got was it went to the global error handler, and the last payload we got was from the last payload that got returned to the flow reference was this one. But now it should return this one because it matches. And also, even if it doesn't match, also it should return that. You can get this project, I will push it to GitHub. You can get it from there, modify the error type here. Like for example, select in here, if I select, let's say this is HTTP request related. And if you select, if you put other types of errors, you see since here we have only HTTP request related. The 2 are request operations. The error types we see here are all HTTP related, but you can put another type of error here that is not here. You can manually put it yourself. So that means it will not match. In this case, the error will be handled by Mulus default error handler, not by the global error handler. So let's start with this one. It is any by default. So I will send the request again. Maybe I'll take some 10 minutes, additional 10 minutes. So go here, if we can, here. So see the sequence of operation. It has successfully completed up to here, up to the logger. Click next. It will come to the private flow. The genderize will fail. Nationalize works fine. Genderize fails. An error object gets created. Now, as you can see, it came here to the error handler in that private flow. It doesn't go to the application level error handler. So it comes to here. Yeah, the rest is once it is resolved in this case because I use it on error continue. So there is no error object here in the mule event that you see since it got resolved. So there is no any error. But in this transform, since the payload I have, it is not an object, it's just string. This transform will fail. So yeah, so that is the sequence of execution when we have on error continue. I mean, when we have flow level and application level in the processor level error handling scopes. Okay, what are the other things I have for today? Okay, let's see this one, mapping errors to custom error types. Why do we need this? This one, if you go to the slides here, make this slide view. So you can have, for example, in the flow we just saw, we had two HTTP request operations connecting to the genderized and the nationalized APIs. And if the error is connection HTTP connectivity error, then both of them they will give the same kind of error. So it is not possible to know which one of them failed from the logs in this case, and we can customize them. So one of them we can say the genderized failed, the HTTP connectivity you can change it, customize it to genderized failed, and the other one we can make it nationalized failed, and so on. Or we have this I'm connecting to Postgres and MySQL. If both of them are, if either of them is down, the error I will get will be DB connected. It will not tell me whether this failed or this failed. Let's say this one is connecting to customers data, this customer's database, whereas this is orders database. So we may want to customize DB connectivity errors to orders failed or customers failed. So for each module operation in a flow, each possible error type can be mapped to a custom error type. That's what we said. And when we define namespaces, we'll see an example. We can create our own namespace and identifier, but they should not be the namespaces that are already there. They should not be existing namespaces. For example, you cannot customize, you cannot create DB colon connectivity because DB colon connectivity is already taken, but we can create, for the order, for example, we can create orders namespace, and for the customers, we can create customers namespace, but we cannot use existing namespaces. When you create custom namespaces, remember, you cannot use already existing namespaces, is what this slide is saying. Let's quickly check this. Okay, we can check it. So in here, I will stop this, and here we are connecting to two databases, and this one, Postgres, you go under error mapping, by the way. See the select operation here, there is error mapping here. Or if it is in this request also, you see error mapping here. So you can map the errors by just clicking this add new error mapping. So let's see, for example, what it returns when Postgres is down versus MySQL is down. So here, under error mapping, employee. So I can make it employee failed. Whereas the second one, it connects to employee territory. So the namespace, in this case, I will make it rather than MySQL, I will make the namespace employee territory. I'm not sure the errors are caused by that. And then in here, just copy, for this one, just copy this. And I think I have seen it. This could be dependent on the error. This error could be because of the version of Anypoint Studio. I have seen Anypoint Studio 4.4 or something has some with handling custom error mapping. I will check that. If this fails, I'll check for tomorrow, and we'll see tomorrow. So this one, I will come here and put this one here. One thing, it should not, in the drop down under any, I'm surprised that it shows me the error mapping namespace that I put. And the second thing, then at the end, it says it couldn't get it while it shows itself in the list. Okay, and this one is employee failed. So this one, we change it to employee failed. Save, and stop. And run it in debug mode. Here. So until this gets whether deployed or failed, if let me check if there are any things I want to say in the slides. So yeah, today's project I will push it, and also I have quizzes project, and also make sure to do this assignment. By the way, error handling, if you don't practice it, it will still continue confusing you. It is good to practice it. So once you understand it, you will not lose it. You will not. It will not confuse you. But first, you have to spend enough time, and to do that, the assignment will help you. So make sure you get this assignment from GitHub and practice it, and also go over the slides. Just practice yourself by modifying the HTTP listener, this default configuration, and check what it returns. And also when you have flow level, processor level, and application level errors, what happens, check that. The only thing we have not covered is, the system level error handler. That is just resetting, setting reconnection strategy. We'll see that, or you can read it in the slides. It should be easy. So reconnection strategy is, so we said we have two types of errors, right? We said in the beginning, messaging errors, which we have been seeing so far, and system errors. So messaging errors happen when there is a flow event and an error object gets created with it, whereas system errors happen in the beginning, when during application startup, when you try to connect to external systems. And in that case, the only option we have is introducing reconnection strategy. What that means is, in this slide, I have in the default database configuration, for example, if you go under advanced here, rather than failing just by after checking one time and the database is offline, you can specify reconnection. So here I am saying try 5 times with a frequency of 6,000 milliseconds. So if it is the database temporarily offline or something happened with it, it will try to send requests 5 times and give you an error. So this can be done in the global properties, in the global elements properties, or in the connector properties. This is in the global, as you can see here, global element properties, whereas this one is just for the HTTP request itself under genderize. I went to advanced. You can go to advanced and select, by default, this reconnection strategy is none. You put select standard, and the reconnection attempts and the frequency can specify here. So this is what we can do with system errors. The rest types of the errors we have been dealing with are messaging errors or mail errors. So this one, let's see if, okay, yeah, probably this one is related with the version of the Mule runtime. I will check that and let you know tomorrow, but it should work. We should get a workaround. But what should happen in this case is, anyway, at least we can talk about the theory. If Postgres is down, the error for this connection, the error I am mapping it to employee failed. So employee failed should be handled by this error handling scope, which is on error propagate. If MySQL is down, the error is mapped to employee territory failed, and that should be handled by this one. So as you can see, you can even make on error continue for one of them and on error propagate for the other if one of them is optional and the other one is mandatory. The optional, you can make it on error continue so that you can continue your execution, whereas the mandatory one can make it on error propagate.